And good evening, everybody. Yes, it's. I'm sorry it's a little bit late, but I've just been talking to my guest and checking through a few things. It's absolutely fantastic to be with you tonight, Friday. I have got probably my most exciting guest that I've been able to get in contact with. The guest tonight is Brooks Jensen, as you've seen from my introductions on the Google Plus and Facebook. Brooks is about to go past the 870 edition of his podcast. He's been doing podcasts and broadcasts before Apple even thought of the word podcast. So it's with great pleasure from a new kid on the block that I welcome an experienced older kid on the block, Brooks Jensen. Welcome to my show, Brooks.
Thanks. I'm delighted to be here. The older kid on the block part, well, that's just, we'll let that go. That's fine.
Let that go. I like the kid part of it. I wanted to keep it young, you know what I mean? Because you're a young thinking man. That's what I like to say. Brooks, normally I start my show off by talking about where did photography start for you, but I want to switch that around a little bit because I first came across you by searching through the internet because I was looking for a photographic magazine, and I came across Lenswork. Well, to say that the website opened up a Pandora's box for me and all the detail that was in there was just truly amazing. So I'd like to start that off with the website, which is obviously linked to the publication of Lenswork. Obviously, the magazine came first. This is just a labour of love, basically, of photography and how you're developing through Lenswork to the audience.
Very definitely a labor of love. I was a photographer for many years, subscribed to lots of magazines, but I had one of those fateful moments when I met what was going to become my wife and publishing partner, and she is also a photographer and asked me what magazines, we were dating at the time, what magazines do you subscribe to? And I said, well, quite honestly, I don't subscribe to any magazines. And I said, what magazines do you subscribe to? And she said, well, I don't subscribe to any either. And we asked each other why, and we concluded that the reason is because most photography magazines are about cameras, not about photography. And she then asked, if you could subscribe to a magazine of your dreams, what would it be? Could you describe it? I said, I can not only describe it, I can show it to you. And I went up to my bookshelf and I pulled out some of the very early apertures from the 1950s when Minor White founded the magazine and started publishing it, and it's not at all what you think of when you think of aperture today. It was very Lenswork-like. And I said, this is what I would like to subscribe to. And shortly after we got married, we decided to do it. And so we started Lenswork on a wing and a prayer, with no advertising whatsoever, but with the hope that there were a lot of people out there who shared our passion with photography. And in fact, there's a huge number of us. So it's been very delightful for me to make contacts with people like you and from subscribers all around the world who share my passion with photography.
So initially, the magazine went out like any normal magazine, was on the bookshelf of the magazine shops, and you were selling it through that nature?
Actually, the first 4 copies of Lenswork we gave away for free, with the idea that we would do a magazine that was supported financially by advertising, and it would be only articles and essays on photography and the creative process, no photographs whatsoever.
All right.
And so it was interviews, etc. And so a photography magazine with no photographs may not have been my best business idea ever.
No.
We did it that way for 4 issues and then decided this isn't going to work. We have to rethink. So believe it or not, we went out and bought a printing press and put it in our garage. And I learned how to run a printing press by buying something called the Navy Lithographer's Manual, which was a World War II document that taught you how to run the kind of press that we had, with such wonderful advice as treat a press gently as you would a girl on your first date. That tells you how dated this thing was.
Yeah.
And we printed Lenswork number 5 through 11 ourselves in the garage, and that's when we actually started selling them. It wasn't until I think it was maybe issue 13 or 14 that we landed it in the bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Borders Books, Chapters in Canada, etc. And that's when things really took off. But, you start humble and see what happens.
Well, exactly right, you do. So the actual process, the idea of this magazine then was not to get involved with advertising, not to talk about gear, the new cameras that are coming out. And of course, we're going back a number of years here, and so we weren't seeing the plethora that we see now of cameras coming out literally almost every month. The manufacturers in those days, I'm assuming the likes of Nikon and Canon were around in those days. I hope I'm not saying the wrong thing there, but they would probably bring out a new camera maybe once every 18 months, every 2 years probably. So the advertising side of it would not be what you would experience now with this consistent this camera, or this lens. It probably would have been more along the lines of film, chemicals. That's
there has to be a financial foundation for any commercial enterprise like Lenswork. And we talked about it in the very early days and decided we would take advertising, which we did for the first few years, until we suddenly came to the realization that it was just more trouble than it was worth, and that we wanted to try a different sort of approach. And as silly as it sounds, we thought, if we produce something that is high quality, that photographers will appreciate and enjoy and maybe even want to keep on their bookshelves as a reference device, if we can provide that, then maybe we don't need advertising to pay for it. Maybe people will be willing to pay for it because they'll find enough value in it. And that was our paradigm from the very beginning. And once we got up and rolling in Barnes & Nobles, we dropped all the advertising, and we simply said, if you want to subscribe to it, we're happy to include you to the list. And we didn't run any advertising because we thought, again, if we're producing anything of value that people like, they'll tell their friends and photo buddies, and we'll survive by word of mouth. And we've been at it now for 21 years. And it's still going strong. So I guess we must have a strategy that works.
And I might add, you've won a number of awards with regards to the magazine in the North America, yeah?
Yeah, we have. The printing quality of Lenswork is the core, and we've spent a lot of time working on that. We've won a number of printing awards and quality awards, etc., based on essentially what is a small book. That's one of the problems of Lenswork is we've never quite figured out what to call it, to be honest with you, because the minute I use the word magazine, an image comes to mind that is, 8.5 by 11, or that kind of size, printed on, lightweight paper on a web press, with the printing quality that you get in a high quality newspaper. Lenswork is not that. It's printed on a book press. It's printed in stochastic duotone. It's literally museum book quality, and that's part of Lenswork's identity, and part of my great joy in producing it is
exactly right. I remember that when the Camera Club that I used to be a member of, I gave a presentation on magazines which were available for everyone to look at. And obviously in this country we've got What Camera, we've got Amateur Photographer, which has been going for years, as I'm sure you appreciate, and then there's others, Black and White Photography, and then I showed them Lenswork, and that was the I'll call it magazine, but I understand where you're coming from. You say it is like a book. Everyone was looking at this Lenswork, and they were saying, "Where have you found this?" Well, I said, "Well, it comes from the States." Obviously, for us to buy it into the States, it is a little bit more expensive than the normal one down at the local newsagent, which is the next stage, which I'm going to come to in the conversation. And they were bowled over by it. The quality of the photography that was being shown, and of course, that's one thing which you show in this Lenswork. You show projects rather than a genre. You don't say, we're talking street photography for argument's sake, and you have 5 or 6 guys who have taken photographs of street photography. You stick to a project done by said photographer.
Well, there's a double strategy involved in that, quite honestly. Again, I have no secret, so I don't mind talking about this, but we've always visualized Lenswork as an anthology, if you think about it.
Yeah.
and we try to have, anywhere from 4 to 6 to maybe as many as 8 projects in any given Lenswork. And we very carefully assort those so that if you look at, one portfolio and maybe that's not your cup of tea, well, that's fine. Maybe the next one is.
Yeah.
And in any given issue, if we can connect with our audience on, 2, 3, 4 projects, we don't care if they connect with every single one. That's the thing about photography, is it's incredibly varied medium, very exciting to be involved in. And, if someone's doing something that's not your cup of tea, that's fine. Just focus and concentrate on the stuff that is.
But there's always something to learn from the work that you see, whether you like the work or dislike the work. There's something will trigger. Well, that's a nice idea, and I think it's great the way that you show projects in that sense. For instance, there was one that you did, which was one of your very early publications with Michael Kenner. I first came across Michael Kenner when a presenter came to the camera club and showed 5 of his prints on the screen, and I was amazed. And then, of course, I found the magazine, which Lenswork, which had shown his work, which I've got. I've got that copy, so I was delighted to have that. The thing which, in actual fact, now, this is when I say the Lenswork.com website is evolving, and it's consistently evolving with all the things that you offer there. Not only Lenswork, the alumni, Lenswork Online now, of course. Then, of course, you now offer the interviews and the podcasts and the tutorials as well, which is all part of Lenswork Online. I like the way that you've understood, and I think some magazines in the UK took a long time to jump on board. There's the iPad and the tablet which appeared. This is obviously going to be the future, and you realised that, and you jumped on very quickly. I think probably you were one of the first photographic magazines to do so. That must have been an exciting time for you.
Yeah, I don't know if we're one of the first, but maybe. Quite honestly, our motivation for doing so, I wish I could tell you it was brilliant marketing, but it quite honestly just wasn't. We decided to start a digital publication for 2 simple reasons. One is because the content of Lenswork is all about photographs and projects, not about cameras and equipment, it means that the content of Lenswork never goes out of date. So you could go back to something that we published 20 years ago, and it's just as apropos today as it was back then, where a 20-year-old magazine about cameras and lenses is going to be, historically interesting, but not relevant to today's cameras.
Very true.
Lenswork being not about equipment, it meant that it had a life, and we wanted somehow to capture that life. You simply cannot, if you're in the publishing business, stay in print on everything you've ever published in a magazine forever. And when they started to sell out, we thought, well, gosh, we hate to see that content lost. That led us in the first step towards digital publishing. The other thing, however, was even more interesting. We occasionally get a request from people who say, gee, you only do black and white in the magazine. And there's a good reason for that. A side reason is because I'm a black and white photographer and I love black and white, and that's my passion. And I didn't know anything about color or color reproduction, and I just didn't want to do anything that I couldn't do exceedingly well. So that was the primary reason. But we were receiving some requests. Why don't you do a color magazine? So we thought, well, should we break out? Should we do something different? Well, once we started thinking about that, it married with another odd observation, and that has to do with the way we put together Lenswork itself. We take all the submissions that we've accepted for publication, which includes lots and lots and lots of photographs, and we do a giant layout, which oftentimes goes to 300 plus pages. But Lenswork is a 96-page publication.
Yeah.
So then you start the process of editing and culling and weeding out stuff. And it would just break our hearts because there was some fabulous photography that we just didn't have room for. And at that point, I thought, well, if we started a digital publication, a PDF-based publication, where there were no page count limitations, gosh, all of a sudden we can do lots more photography, we can do color photography, we can do audio, we can do video, we can have all kinds of fun that that we simply cannot do within the restrictions of a printed magazine. That led to what we call Lenswork Extended,
Yeah.
which started out as a CD-based publication. Now it's on the web. And then Apple had the good fortune of providing this thing called iPads, which we weren't producing for, but it just fell in our lap, and we said, we've got content for the iPad and for Android tablets that's just perfect.
Yeah.
All of that eventually led to our membership website, Lenswork Online, where we're just able to have lots and lots of fun with tons and tons of content that you could never do in a printed magazine.
No, I must be honest. When obviously I was subscribing to the magazine at the time, and as I said to you, obviously to get it over to the UK was expensive.
Yeah.
When of course, and I was getting the CD as well as the book, because I wanted that archived. Because I think over a period of time, very few of your subscribers, I think, would have them on a bookshelf and say, "Oh, let's go and look at number 4." It would be tucked away in a cupboard somewhere. So to have the CD or the DVD, the CD it was, wasn't it, available, was superb. But when I got the invitation, why don't you consider Lenswork Online? I thought this is a really intriguing move by a publication outfit to move that way. And I don't think I can think of anyone in the country, in the UK, that has considered going that route, because it's not just your magazines, is it? As I say, we've got the alumni, which is the regular newsletter which goes out, but all your interviews, all your podcasts, all the tutorials are there for us to sit back and enjoy and learn.
Well, here's a dumb little example. By sheer coincidence, early in my career, I was an electronics buyer in business, and so I was immersed in the world of audio equipment, including tape recorders and all that kind of stuff. And I started taking tape recorders with me to every photography workshop I ever went to, and I was loaning tape recorders to my friends. We're talking back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And they would go to an Ansel Adams workshop or whatever with a tape recorder and record. I have boxes and boxes of these cassette tapes from old, photographers' workshops, et cetera, et cetera. Well, why not share that? Lenswork Online gives us the ability to do that. So we're in the process of converting all of those into MP3 files and posting them on the internet. And here's a good example of why this is so fun. Are you familiar with the book called Art and Fear by David Bales and Ted Orland?
No, I'm not.
Oh, it's a fabulous book. Must read. I'll give them a strong plug here. Mandatory read. One of the best books ever on art and the creative life. Well, I had been to a lot of David Bales' workshops in the previous years and recorded lots and lots of him talking about photography and the creative process. We posted all of these online not long ago, and I got a lovely email from David saying that we had captured in those audios all the nascent thoughts that went into that book before they had even thought about doing it as a book. He said, to some degree, this is an important historic archive. Well, I never thought about that. I was just learning photography. Yeah. But we have audio of Ansel Adams and of Minor White and of Ruth Bernhard and et cetera, as well as contemporary photographers, whether it's Bruce Barnbaum or John Sexton or whoever. Well, all of that, I'm emphasizing one little tiny area of Lenswork Online, but it just is an example of how rich the content can be with something like Lenswork Online. So we developed this membership website where we make downloadable copies of the magazine and Lenswork Extended and audio archives and all the podcasts, etc. It's a giant playground for photographers, and I'm just having a ball with it. It's fun.
I couldn't agree more. I'm having a ball with it, reading through it, and there's just something there all the time. I think one of the most intriguing ideas that you presented to us, which is now being copied by our good friend Martin Bailey. I use the term copied. He's using the folio idea of creating, because I'm coming now round to your photography and how you effectively presented your work. The folio idea of creating this envelope with 10 prints, with description, notification, and etc. was just such a simple but superb idea, which just makes us just a great present to give out. And if, for instance, myself, if you don't mind me saying, I was fortunate enough a couple of years ago to get awarded a licentiateship with the Royal Photographic Society. It's the lowest step of the 3 levels they've got. And my mentor had really helped me a great deal. So I was trying to think of a way to thank him. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll just do 10 A5 prints, put them in an envelope, little note, thank you very much indeed. And, well, I'm not going to say he nearly cried, but I could see in his face that it meant something to him, and then to give that was just fantastic.
Yeah.
The folio idea is superb. Where did the folio idea come from, Brooks?
Two sources, really. One of the first projects I ever did is called Made of Steel. It's now published as a book. It's monograph #1 in the Lenswork monograph series. Yeah. But this is tools of greasy, pictures, photographs of greasy tools, machine shops, guys. Well, you know, this is not decor. Who's going to want to hang a pair of pliers above their fireplace? You know, exactly, so it really belongs in a book. But when I had my first exhibition of that work, a lot of people were interested in the work, etc., but they couldn't afford or didn't want to buy prints, which is how it was being exhibited, on the wall, because it just didn't make sense. So they all started asking, can I buy a book of this work? And I said no, because I didn't have a book. So the minute the show was over, I scurried down to my local printer and I took with me a copy of Ansel Adams' Yosemite Range of Light, that wonderful, beautiful 300-line screen duotone. I said, I want a book like this. When he got done drooling, he sent me a quote, you know, for $100,000 or something. It was just absurd. Yeah. The book was never going to happen, and I thought, I need to figure out a way to produce something that is sort of book-like in that it has lots of pictures, but not so expensive, that I can produce myself in the darkroom, etc. And it took me about 2 years of experimenting and a couple of classes in handmade artist books, etc. But eventually it all evolved to the Folio Concept. And so a folio is a small, as you said, little art paper envelope that allows me to include 5 prints, 10 prints, 20 prints, and to turn them into a thing. And I think of folios as somewhere halfway between a book and an original print. Yeah. Like a book, it has many images, but like an original print, they come out of the darkroom, they're artist-made originals, so it's collectible, they're signed, they're numbered, all that kind of stuff. So they're an art product, but they're kind of book-like, they're just not bound. Yeah. Well, once I had that in mind, it not only gave me a venue for lots of creative projects, all of a sudden the explosion of ideas, this, etc., gave me something to do to finish a project other than an exhibition. But that idea of the one-off that you just mentioned was right on the heels of the invention. I realized I could go somewhere and send somebody a thank you one-off for letting me stay with them for a while I was photographing, or send someone a congratulatory something or other. And I could do a one of one as well as a, you know, one of 100 or one of 200. You don't want to do these by the thousands. If you're going to do that, you might as well get a book printed. Exactly right. But for 1, 5, 20, 100, this was the perfect medium. So I started doing them. Then we did a workshop on how to do them because we started getting so many requests. Yeah. And by the way, that's one of the things that's the Lenswork online membership site, is that entire workshop, because we thought, why make people buy discs and ship them all over the world? We can just make the content available there. So anyway, Folios has been a real joy for me to see how a solution that I developed, quite honestly, for my work and only my work in thought, has turned out to be a solution for lots of photographers. Now they're being done all over the world, and I just get the biggest kick out of that. Martin Bailey's regularly advertising his folios of his nature and landscape work, based out in Tokyo there. Let's talk about the subject which you don't normally talk about. Let's geek out a little bit on gear for a second. Sure. What was the first camera that you ever had, Brooks? Oh gosh. Well, the first one I ever had was a Brownie, but the first one I ever tried to make artwork with was a Praktica 35 millimeter single lens reflex that was just awful.
Couldn't get on with it.
Yeah, I didn't really do anything interesting until I started using medium format, Mamiya C330s, that kind of thing. Eventually, I evolved sort of slowly up the scale, as many photographers have done, to view cameras. My view camera of choice was an Arca Swiss 2¼ 3¼ view camera, which I used for, gosh, almost 30 years. It
Really?
was the perfect combination of control and tilt and swing and all of that kind of stuff, but it used either sheet film or 120, 220 roll film backs. So it
Right.
gave me the advantage of roll film and portability, but all the movements of a monorail view camera. And that was my main camera right up until the digital age.
Yeah. Did you study photography at high school or any of that
Yeah,
nature?
I did.
Yeah.
But only in high school. Kind of an odd story. I was actually in a science class where I needed to learn how to take pictures through the microscope of protozoa. And I had to learn something about photography because that's kind of a complicated thing to do. So I
Yeah.
took a photography class. They gave me an assignment to do a book review. So I trotted on down to the high school library and stumbled across the work of Win Bullock in a beautiful book that was published by the Scrimshaw Press in the 70s. It was fabulous, and I thought, this is what photography is, and that was the end of Protozoa. At that point, I was a
Strange.
photographer and
That was it.
committed. And I was actually, my senior year in high school, I was teaching college level photography at a local community college,
Lovely.
and really helped fund my college
Mm.
education.
It's one of my regrets actually, because my first camera was a Zenit E, in terms of an SLR, and well, they were built like tanks.
Yeah,
And again, as a camera which I never really got on with, but I do remember going into the darkroom for the first time at secondary. We call it secondary school over here,
yeah.
and did my first print in the darkroom there, and thoroughly enjoyed it. But unfortunately, the pull of the playing field for rugby and football was a little bit too strong in those days. So
Yeah.
photography didn't really catch on in terms of doing my own work until well into my 20s, when I used to print Zebrachromes from Kodachrome transparencies.
You would be shocked how many times I've heard that in the course of the some 500 interviews I've done for Lenswork, where someone says they had an introduction to photography and it planted a seed,
Yeah,
but then life gets in the way,
yeah,
but the seed doesn't go away. And it's amazing how many
yeah.
times people end up coming back to photography after 20, 30, 40 years. That's a testament to the power of the medium
Very much so.
to stay with us.
Yeah, it's very much so. So we've gone through the camera, early camera, now up to date. Where you're a digital photographer now, I'm correct in assuming yes. I thought it was. What gear are you using now?
The current gear I own.
Okay.
You know, like I said, I used an Arca Swiss for 30 years and
Yeah,
never looked twice at buying another camera. I'd buy a lens from time to time.
yeah,
But I think I've gone through 30 cameras in the last 5 years. I mean, the digital world is evolving so rapidly.
yeah.
The good news for me, quite honestly, this is where, I feel kind of bad in some regards, almost guilty. I make, through folios and chapbooks and the things that I do, relatively small prints as my final work, which means I can get away with a lot more humble machine than a lot of photographers can. I just recently introduced exhibition prints, which are 13.5 by 18 image on 17 by 22. That's big for me.
Yeah,
Most of my work is, well, as you say, A3 and smaller.
yeah,
So with that in mind, I've had no problems with anywhere from 8 to 16 megapixel cameras doing spectacular images, because that's all the bigger I produce. Currently,
yeah.
today, ask me next week and might differ.
Might change.
But today, and for the last several years, actually, I've been using the Panasonic Lumix cameras.
Okay.
I bought a G1, loved it, very quickly bought a G2, loved that, used that for a number of years. I'm currently using a G6 and a GM1 for portability. I keep hoping they're going to come out with a G7, but, when that happens, I'll probably jump on board. Again, for me, it's just a tool to get where I want to get, but those cameras seem to work the way my brain works.
Yeah.
And so I don't have to think much about them. As I age, you introduced me as the old guy. Is that what you said, the old guy?
The old experienced guy. No, kid. I said kid.
I'm finding, quite honestly, in terms of creature comfort features,
yeah,
I have a hard time even considering a camera now that doesn't have a fully articulated LCD screen.
Oh, really? Right. Okay.
So that I can get low, I can get high, I can see, I can compose. By the way, because I was a 2 1/4, 3 1/4 monorail guy for so many years, an LCD screen is about what I saw.
Yeah, exactly.
So to me, this is old home week. It's no different than what I did for all those years with film.
It's right up your street, isn't it? Yeah, working off the screen there. It's right up your street, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now,
really.
Correct me if I'm wrong here. The camera there, that's a 4/3 sensor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. And it's an interesting point you make, actually, because it does make me laugh when we go into the camera shops and we pick up these cameras, the latest version, and you watch other people and they take a photograph in the shop and they immediately look at the back, chimping as we call it, looking at the back of the screen, and wow, look at that, and I feel like going up to them and saying, well, of course it's going to look good because it's got 2 million dots of pixels on the back there. What you really need to know is, what does the print look like? This is one of the things which I'm missing from not being a member of a camera club at the moment, is I'm not printing as much as I used to. And the amount of times I've asked the sales reps in the shops there, yep, look at that image on the back there, sir. Doesn't that look great? Yes, it does. But what does an A4 print look like? What does an A3 print look like? And they don't know. They haven't got an answer. They haven't got an example to show me until when I was considering selling all my Nikon gear, excuse me, because of the weight on my back and everything else that I had in there, that I went into the shop in Birmingham where I was visiting my daughter, and I was talking about the Fuji XE1. And the guy said, look at that on the back there, sir. So I said, yeah, but what does it print like? And he said, funny you should say that. And he gave me a book. He gave me a book of A4 prints made either by the XE1 or the X Pro one. Well, that basically sold the camera to me because we could see what I was going to get from an A4 print. And my experience of printing, when I can see a good A4 print, I know that I'm potentially going to get pretty damn close to a good A3 print. When we've got the opportunities to do editing in our Lightroom and that sort of thing. So yeah, the 4/3 sensor, there's not a problem with that if you're going to be regularly printing at A4 and below. There's no problem with that. You're going to get some very, very good quality, aren't you?
Well, it's all a matter of reverse engineering in my way of thinking. You have to decide what it is that you want to do photographically. Where is your creative vision leading you? And if your creative vision is leading you to, 4 foot by 3 foot prints that are going to cover a wall somewhere, a micro 4/3 sensor is not going to do the job. You better reverse engineer to whatever equipment is needed. And I think that's part of the real challenge for a lot of photographers is they don't know what it is that they want to produce, what it is that they want to say. They spend a lot of time, we all do, of course, developing our craft because, it takes dedication. It's hard to make a really spectacular photograph. So we spend time doing that. The problem is many people, I've talked to lots of them, find when they develop their craft and they get to the point where they can make a print, then they start saying, okay, now what do I want to photograph? And at that point, it's kind of, too late. Well, it's never too late, but you see my point.
Yeah, I do.
You really should start thinking about what is it that I want to say, photographically, artistically, particularly if you're using photography as a means of personal expression, so-called fine art photography, if you will. If you're using it for that, then I think that's the nub of being a photographic artist, is trying to figure out what you want to say, why you think you want to say it, why you think it's important that other people hear it. Once you've figured all that out, then the equipment simply becomes a tool in service of that.
And that's
So,
exactly right. The camera, exactly. Reverse engineering is a very good way of putting it. And of course, the camera is, at the end of the day, it is a tool, and it is not something to pose with and say, look at me, I'm a good photographer because I've got a Nikon D4 over my shoulder. And
yeah. Well, the problem with that is, boy, it's so easy to have a love affair with your camera. I mean, that Arca Swiss monorail that I had for all those years, I loved that thing. It was, I've tracked it. Who owns it, and every time somebody sells it, I get an email that says, I've got this camera that used to, and it makes my heart go pitter patter because I had a relationship with this camera. But the reality is the relationship was independent of my photography. What I was trying to say artistically is different than the relationship I had with the camera. I wish now I'd kept the camera and I just had it in the living room and I could look lovingly over at it from time to time.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
But as a tool maker, as a photograph maker, I'm so glad I have today's tools because they've made my life so much easier.
Well, this is very true. The tools that are available are fantastic, really, the way they're constantly evolving. What I'd like to do, Brooks, it's a good point. I'm going to do a screen share here now, and we'll get to this is going to go funny now. You're going to see a little bit of a tunnel vision. It always happens. If I can, before I do that, let's just make sure let's put that up. There we go. So screen share. I get the link working here. Here we go. And there we go. Can you see that? Or are you seeing
there? I can now. Yes.
You can now. So for those that are watching, this is brooksjensenarts.com. I'm correct here saying, Brooks, there is. Hold on one sec. If I leave it on me. There we go. We won't get the right. You can see your website now, yes?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. So correct me if I'm wrong here. There's no actual portfolio page that I can go to, Brooks. No, these are just your examples of what we were talking about. Your folios, which are available for people to purchase. Is that right?
Well, sort of. I have a different strategy about websites, which is different than most. Most photographer websites that I look at divide their website by media. So they say, here's my gallery of prints that you can buy. Here's my books that you can buy. Here's my whatever.
Sounds like mine.
Yeah, and then there's a bio section and etc. I don't do that with my website because I think and I work and I produce in the form of projects.
Yes.
And so I've divided my website, if you will, in projects. So every one of these thumbnail pictures and little descriptions that you see describe a project that I've done. Yeah. The media may be unique. That is to say, like the Market Day one that you were just showing, that exists only as a video.
Right, okay.
Online video. The next one down, Suspended Without Wings, is a chapbook. Many of my projects end up in multiple formats. That is to say, they might be a folio of a dozen prints. They might also be a handmade artist book, hand-sewn and bound. That's a little what's called a chapbook. They might exist as large-scale prints. Many of them exist as a PDF publication that you can view on your computer or your iPad. So this website, my home page, if you will, simply lists all the projects that I've done, and then at the bottom of the description of each project, it describes which media that project is available in,
Yeah, I can see
whether
it.
it's a free PDF or a chat book or whatever the case may be. So my thinking is, when you come into my website, what I want you to be able to do is find some topic that you're interested in.
Yeah.
And once you find a topic that you're interested in, then you can follow that media wherever it takes you, PDF, prints, chatbook, folio, whatever. But really, the core is not the media. The core is the project. So I think
Yeah.
inside out, in terms of the project is the center, the media might be multiple, might be single, and is almost secondary.
Yeah. I get the idea that it's an intriguing idea because, as you say, describing a normal website, just as you described mine, really, it's a selection of different portfolios of work. I like doing street photography. I've got a section on some cars that I've taken, a section on some bikes that I've taken, and that's how I've gone about it, rather than, as what you're showing here, you're showing projects, and obviously you're making them available for people to either lucky enough to have it for free or to purchase.
And, you know, speaking of that, I really like this idea of sharing my work through the broadest possible audience I can, which is why, in my case, I've decided to use the strategy of making almost everything I do available as a free downloadable PDF. Different photographers will have different thoughts about that. Some will want to sell a PDF. Some will think that they shouldn't even do a PDF because, you know, that's giving something away for free or whatever. My objective is always to share my work with as many people as are interested in it, with as little barrier as possible, which is why I use very inexpensive prints, like these $25 popular edition prints, unmatted, signed prints, so that even a student can afford to buy them. I used to love to buy Fred Picker $25, he called them darkroom sample prints.
Yeah.
You know, and it was great as a student to be able to afford those kinds of things. Lately, I've just introduced the exhibition suite prints, which are the larger prints for people that want to put something on the wall. Those are an exception because they're not project oriented, but most everything else is project oriented.
Yeah. Let's just show the viewers. Let's just put in Lenswork online. We won't be able to go any further than that because you have to log in on this, and obviously you pay a subscription for it.
Yeah, this is a membership website.
Yeah.
It's $59 a year. By the way, there's a Christmas sale on right now.
Yeah, exactly.
For people that aren't listening at Christmas, it's $59 a year,
Yeah.
and it gets you access to tons and tons and tons of stuff. And so there's so much I can't even describe it all.
No, there's so much here. I think one of the most intriguing ones that I watched was where you were over the desk talking to the printers about how you were going to get the work sorted for this production that you were putting together, a publication you're putting together. But it's just totally fascinating because there's so much here that people can learn about how to present their work, podcast their interviews. And one thing which I want to talk to you, bottom left-hand corner where I'm waving the cursor around, is what has generally been let me just get back to the screen share when I can get back. Here we go. Let's click off the screen share. Cancel. Is the Roadshow, Brooks. This has been very, very popular for you in the States.
It has been. Yeah.
And this is where you sit down and you talk one-to-one.
That's a part of it.
Yeah. Do you do it? Because I don't know anything about this. Do you do a presentation first, sort of like a lecture, and then you sit down with the photographer and talk about his work? How does this actually work?
Well, the roadshow that we've done for the last 2 years, we did the west coast of the U.S. last year. I did the east coast of the U.S. this year. Consists of 4 seminars, 4 half-day seminars conducted over 2 days. And so they're you know, a workshop sort of seminar presentation, and we've talked about image and text, how to produce a folio chapbook, that kind of thing, project-oriented photography, and then the last component is how to develop an audience for your work. So those are the 4 workshops. Since I have time on those roadshows, you know, the day before, the day after, whatever the case may be, I also did some one-on-one reviews where I would sit down with people and look at their work. We received so many requests for that, however, that for places that I wasn't traveling, that we started doing it online via Skype, where photographers can send me a selection of their work, set up an appointment, and we have a one-on-one conversation about whatever they want to do. Some photographers want to talk about, how do I take this pile of images and turn it into a project? Some photographers want to talk about, how do I write an introduction? Some want to talk about, how do I make a PDF or a folio? You know, every photographer wants to talk about, how do I sell this?
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So it just depends on what the photographer wants to focus on, and those one-on-one consultations have been very popular.
Yeah, that's true. So my $64,000 question: will we ever see it in the UK?
You know, it would be fun to go. I'd love to. I don't know if I'd have problems in the UK like I ran into in Canada. We wanted to do the roadshow in Canada, but getting a work permit to be able to do something in Canada, because I'm a U.S. citizen, was very complicated and took all kinds of hoops to jump through, and eventually we decided it was just too complicated to do. So I couldn't do the roadshow in Canada as much as I wanted to because of the work permits and all of that kind of stuff. Whether or not those barriers exist in the UK, I don't know. Maybe the perfect answer is if someone in the UK wants to sponsor a workshop and I'll come over and be a teacher. That'd be fun.
Well, that's an idea.
Only if I can bring my camera and stay for an extra week after the workshop is done, however.
You can bring your little digital one, but you can't bring your mono.
There you go.
You can't walk around London streets with a tripod and a monorail. Yeah, maybe I'm just joking with you. I'm just joking. So what sort of projects are you into at the moment with regards to your work? What are you enjoying photographing at the moment? Is there something which is really getting your juices flowing, so to speak?
Yeah. You know, that's an interesting question, because I think that's the way most photographers think, is what am I photographing today? And you know, that's not at all how I think, strangely enough. I was very influenced on this when I interviewed Jerry Uelsmann. And if you know Jerry Uelsmann and his recombinant imagery, he does some really fanciful stuff. He was doing Photoshop long before Photoshop was even thought of. And I asked Jerry Uelsmann during an interview, I said, when you're out with your camera, are you photographing things and thinking about how you can use what you've just photographed in one of your recombinant images? He said, no. He says, I'm never thinking about that. He said, when I'm out in the world with my camera, all I'm doing is gathering assets.
Yeah.
He said, then when I get back in the studio, I look through my assets, and that's when the creative process happens, and I start thinking about ideas and concepts and how I'm going to combine things. To me, it was like a revelation, because I was sort of an Ansel Adams acolyte. I thought you had to pre-visualize everything, and you were supposed to see in your mind's eye the finished piece of work before you click the shutter. And here Jerry Uelsmann was saying, no, he doesn't even start the process until he gets back in the studio. It changed my way of working. When I'm out in the world with a camera now, all I'm doing is responding to the world intuitively, without thinking. Matter of fact, when I start thinking, I may start making lousy photographs. I just intuitively respond to whatever strikes me. The artwork I make all happens when I get back, load everything up into Lightroom, do my keywording, start thinking about what I've seen, and all the projects come there. So my artwork is not created in the field with the camera. It's created here when I start thinking about what I photographed. Now, oftentimes what happens, in the spirit of true confession, is I'll capture an idea in my mind and think, oh, that's the project. I can use this image and this image and this image, and I'll realize I don't have all the images I need to complete that project. Now things flip, and suddenly I'm out in the world on assignment, if you will. I've given myself an assignment. I need this, I need this, I need this to finish the project.
Yeah.
But I'm also simultaneously out there on the same session with the camera, just responding. So that's my approach.
I was going to say, there's a good point you mentioned there about the way to take the photograph, the way you're walking about and taking the image as you see it. When you get back to your studio, do you download and start working on them straight away?
Depends on how excited I am by what I've seen.
Yeah.
Sometimes I just can't wait, and I'm working on images while they're still uploading from the card. Sometimes I'll put stuff into Lightroom and think, what was I thinking? Why did I photograph that? And it isn't for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, I go, oh, look at that.
Yeah.
There's also a thing that I do that's kind of fun. Most of my early photographic days, I did what I call PBWA, photography by wandering around. You know, you're just looking for something spectacular to photograph. Now, in Lightroom, with this gathering assets kind of premise, I do PBPA, photography by pooping around. I'll just go into Lightroom, grab a bunch of images, and start playing with them.
Yeah.
And sometimes, particularly because Lightroom's non-destructive editing and it's ideally suited for this, I'll just start seeing what I can do with an image, and all of a sudden, the project idea appears almost out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Well, I think what's really happening is every photographer is gathering images out in the world because it somehow is speaking to them on a deep level. Yeah. Think of all the things you walk by you don't photograph, right?
Yeah.
Why did you photograph the things that you did photograph? They obviously spoke to you or to your creative muse, but maybe on such a deep subconscious level that you don't have any idea why you photographed it. This is precisely why I say to photographers, when you get back from a session and you find that you've uploaded or you develop your film or whatever, and you find an image in there that you have no recollection of photographing whatsoever, pay really close attention to that one.
Yeah.
Because that's where your subconscious is speaking most uninhibitedly.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer of that, the subconscious mind when you're taking a photograph. I've heard it mentioned many, many times. I didn't even realize what was going on in the background when I took the image, but for some reason I took this photograph. And it may be something. For instance, it happened to me only a couple of days ago. I was taking a photograph of a puddle. The first time I'd done some night photography. I took the photograph and clicked and walked away, and I did a quick chimp, looked at it, and there was a Wellington boot. Wellington boot walking past the puddle, and I thought, I can't believe that I've taken that photograph. You know, it's just quite amazing how the subconscious mind, and I really do think subconscious working with that little finger pressing the shutter, and really it comes back to when I used to play golf, and I used to teach golf from time to time, and I used to say to a lot of guys, and I think this is another thing which happens with the camera. The camera sometimes can get in your way. You're thinking too much about the camera. You're thinking too much about the lens you're using, too much about the aperture you're using, and so on and so forth. It gets in the way, and I always remember reading another Harvey Pinnock, one of my favorite golfing writers, where he said, just stand to the ball, you've done all your practice, hit the ball, play it subconsciously. And I think I think a lot of things that we do these days, we do subconsciously without reading and thinking too deeply into it. And photography, I think, is one of the main things.
It's ideally suited for that. And in fact, this is one of the reasons why I so enthusiastically embrace digital photography. Because you can make copies of files infinitely and play around and play around and play around, and it doesn't cost you anything. You're not wasting a lot of resources and expensive gelatin silver paper, etc. You can just play. And there is, maybe I should use that for PBPA, photography by playing around. That sounds better, doesn't it?
Sounds exactly right. What do you think Ansel Adams would have thought of the digital world? Because he did, in a roundabout way, predict it, I understand. Well, what do you think he would think of What we're experiencing now, you and I.
Well, I asked John Sexton that very question one time, and he said, "Oh, Ansel Adams would have been all over digital. He would have loved it. He would have thought it was great." I don't know. He was all over gelatin silver when gelatin silver was a new material, right?
Oh,
Because when he
yeah,
was a young man, he was making Parmelian prints and albumin prints and the things of the day. And when gelatin silver evolved, he jumped on it and became the master at it.
yeah.
I have every reason to believe that he would have jumped on digital photography appropriately. And but we'll just have to speculate.
Well,
And
speculation. Exactly right. Exactly. Brooks, what's the future for yourself and Lenswork? Is there? I'll just leave it at that. What's the future for yourself and the Lenswork?
well, that's become a more difficult question now that I'm 60. It's absolutely true that as we age as artists, we come more face to face with our own mortality. We start to realize that the theory that we can produce artwork forever is a fanciful, youthful thought, but time does run short. I once wrote an article about how old photographers were when they produced their greatest work. I did this when I turned 40, believe it or not,
Uh-huh.
because I felt a little like, gee, I'm 40 years old and I haven't really done much yet. And if I'm going to ever do anything, I hope I haven't blown it. So I went back and I did a bunch of research. When did Edward Weston, how old was he when he made Pepper Number 30? It's that kind of thing. How old
Yeah.
was Joseph Sudek when he did his great work? And what I found was most of the great photographs by the great photographers were not made in their 20s, 30s, or even 40s. Most of them were made in their late 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Mm.
I felt so comforted by that when I was 40. Now that I'm 60, I'm realizing, what needs to be in my future, God willing and health willing and all of that stuff,
Mm.
what needs to be in my future is more and more completion. More and more, I'm finding myself less and less zeroed in on out in the world gathering photographs and more looking back at my archives and what can I do with them and how can I complete them. So
Mm.
from a personal point of view, not that I'm stopping photographing, I'm still photographing like crazy, but the idea that I'm photographing now so that someday I can produce something, well, someday is now.
Yeah.
And so I'm working more and more. I have ever so many projects that are in mind, and I'll have a big announcement in about 3 weeks.
Good for you. Good for you.
Now, in terms of Lenswork
Yeah.
and the business side and publishing photographs and etc., we're very excited about the Lenswork monographs, which we
Yeah.
just introduced last year. This is Lenswork quality, small books, a little larger than Lenswork actually, but dedicated to the work of one photographer. It's my response to Blurb and all of those print-on-demand things that aren't very good. So we're very excited about that. Lenswork Online just continues to get deeper and deeper and deeper in terms of content. We'll continue to do that.
Mm.
Lenswork Extended, we'll continue to do that. The big question everybody always asks us is, are you going to keep printing Lenswork? Because, there's a lot of pressure in the printing world. And my answer, quite seriously, although it is a little funny, is I'll stop printing Lenswork when they're throwing dirt in on top of me.
Yeah.
I'm a print guy. I was raised as a print guy. I love printing.
Mm.
I love the feel and the look of Lenswork. I love the smell of ink when I open up one that's right off the press.
Yeah.
So the future of Lenswork, hopefully, is to continue publishing it as long as my health allows, and I'm hoping that's another 10, 15, 20 years. Who knows?
Yeah.
But all of these other things are, to me, equally exciting. So thankfully, we have great staff, and we're able to make lots of things. And well, the joke around here is you always have to be careful when Brooks has a long drive because he'll come back with a new idea.
Exactly right. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I completely agree with you. When the smell of print after what was it, 20 odd years of working in London, the city, and then getting involved with selling print and working for a printing company, you can't beat that smell of print coming off something totally brand new. I used to marvel at the print minders and how they got their values right, and it was just amazing how they produced their work, all by sight, obviously in those days, and we're going back sort of about 1998, so it's not really that, there was 16 odd years, it's not that long ago, but it was all done by sight, and now of course they're using the certain instruments to make sure they got the correct color in a certain place, but I used to
Well,
marvel
I do have one odd story, if I have time, that is
yeah, sure.
me so important, and that's this. As a printer now, this is my publisher hat comes on. I can't help but think back in history. Let's consider Edward Weston, maybe Ansel Adams. Let's look at those guys as photographers. When they made a print, an original print, it was absolutely spectacular. Beautiful tones. We still look at them today. We still love them today. But when they wanted to make a book was something that was primitive. The inks weren't very black. The screen was pretty coarse. You could see the dots. It was, and so virtually every photographer I've talked to relates the story that at some point in time they went to a gallery and they saw an original print that they had first been introduced in some book, and they were aghast at how wonderful, how fabulous, how terrific the print was, because the difference between the book and the print was so great. Okay? Let's fast forward and look at you and I today, and everybody listening to this. The quality of books that we can print today is so close to the quality of our original prints. We actually get in Lenswork a D-max measured with a densitometer that is greater than I ever got with selenium tone, gelatin silver. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
And with the 20 micron dot stochastic screen, there's virtually no graininess to it. Well, the point is, where Edward Weston had a huge difference between an original print and a reproduction print, today that difference has narrowed to the point where it's almost negligible. I talk to young photographers today, and they say, well, I go to the gallery and I've looked at the prints, but I've seen them in books, and sometimes the book even looks better. They don't realize that that's the case because the print is smaller, so it might be sharper or whatever. The point is, the world has so radically changed that you talk about what's in the future. I think there's something in the future, and I don't know what it is yet. Maybe I'll never know. But this shift in the quality of reproduction work is so substantial that I think it's going to change everything there is about photography. I almost hesitate to say this, but the original print, or the concept of an original print, has almost become an anachronism.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because of the amount when you see a piece of art on the wall, i.e. a painted art or of that nature, you then realise, obviously you can see that is an original the way it is. Now, of course, you can get a reprint of a reprint of a reprint, and as the further case you go down, the value is lost. I am a little bit lost why people collect photographs in terms of an investment. I can't quite understand that. I can't get my head around that, paying, in some cases I know some guys have paid hundreds of thousands of pounds for a print of photograph, where you and I both know that could be quite easily reprinted again and sold out, unless there's some form of copyright set on the print.
Marketing is such a hard thing. I've written about it, but it's such a difficult thing.
Yeah.
But to me, really, the core of the discussion is not so much a marketing strategy and pricing and all that stuff. We could spend hours talking about that. It's really about what it is that people see.
Yeah.
And the quality of what we can see now in reproduction is so incredibly good. It's not lost on me, by the way, that inkjet printers like Epson printers use CMYK inks, which is what commercial printers have used forever.
Yeah.
You know, that when I look at an image on an iPad now, true, it's small, but it's spectacular.
Yeah.
It's backlit. The dynamic range is terrific. How all that is going to impact photography in the next 10 or 15 years, I think is really an interesting discussion. And what the future of that means for things like Lenswork, other than for us old guys who love ink, it's going to be fascinating to see. I wish I could live another 50 years.
It's an amazing how it's the speed of technology which we've experienced, especially when I mentioned 16 years, is just mind-boggling. The way that things have gone with regards to cameras, with regards to printers, with regards to tablets
Yeah.
and computers. It's just amazing.
You mentioned the podcast a few minutes ago, that we do. I started that as a blog. Back then, a blog was a brand new thing. But, as I've said, if you had these fingers, you wouldn't type any better than I do. Short little stubby things. I'm just not a very good typist. And so rather than type a blog, I decided to audio record it. Like I say, I have a long background in audio equipment and recording and electronics and etc. So I started doing these, what I called them at the time, audio blogs. Well, about 6 months later, Apple introduced the iPod and coined the term podcasting. And so, as a joke, I often say that I've been doing podcasting since before podcasting was podcasting. Who could have predicted that was going to come about? Well, by the same token, fast forward 10 years, how are we going to be looking at photographs 10 years from now?
Yeah, exactly.
The iPod is going to seem like a quaint, ancient piece of equipment 10 years from now. How are we going to see it? I've actually taken images. Many people listening to this, I know, have done this, and put them up on your HD TV at home. You have a 42-inch television.
Yep.
And it's 1920 by 1280 or whatever it is. They look fabulous.
Yeah.
10 years from now, when the resolutions are even greater, what is that going to mean for photography? I tell you what I think it's going to mean. I think what it's going to mean is it's all about content, 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 and content. Technology is going to change. But what you say with your photographs, what you communicate, how you express something that connects your mind to the mind of your fellow beings, that's what counts. And that's why photography is important. Not because cameras are magical, but because it's a way for us to connect with one another. Yeah. And I'm hoping, I think this is a fabulous time for photography, because the ease of making photographs is forcing, incentivizing all of us to spend more and more time thinking about what we want to say and how we want to say it with our photography, and less time about the mechanics of doing so, because it's gotten so easy.
Yeah. Yeah,
there's that old business about Ansel Adams standing on Wawona Point with his 8x10 view camera photographing clearing winter storm. And up drives a tourist who jumps out of the car with a 35mm brand new, Canon AE1 or something, and takes a 35mm picture and thinks that they can do what Ansel Adams did. And of course, all of us professional photographers kind of snicker and say, well, when they get the picture, they'll realize that they can't. That camera cannot do what an 8x10 view camera can do. So we find great comfort in that. But today, when that tourist jumps out of the car at Wawona Point and aims their iPad at Yosemite, and a photographer aims his digital SLR at Yosemite, they're both going to get, well, relatively small, true, but they're both going to get prints that can be pretty spectacular.
Yeah,
because it's all done by scientists and mechanics, and which is why, by the way, all the great photography how-to books now are no longer being published by photographers like Ansel Adams did with his print and the negative and all that. They're all being written by software engineers about how to run Photoshop and Lightroom.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, that's a very good
How
point.
does all of this change the next decade that you and I and all the listeners are going to be involved with photography? It puts our focus on content.
Yeah.
I think that's healthy. I think that's good. I hope I live long enough to find out if I'm right.
Yeah, you will. I'm sure you will. You're fresh in mind. That's the main thing. Brooks, we come to the point in the show where I like to ask my guests about their favorite photographer and the person that's inspired them the most. So for you, who is your favorite photographer? And it doesn't have to be an old-timer photographer or a master, as we would call them, or
Goodness. Who's my favorite? I'm going to have to beg off. I can't possibly answer that. Because there's just too many. What I can tell you is there's lots and lots of photographers who've inspired me, and each in their own way are my favorite photographer because of the inspiration they've given me. And this is, I've been thinking about this for a long time, primarily because of an odd experience I had a couple of years ago. I was interviewing a recent MFA graduate of photography. This was not for Lenswork. Interviewing this person, and somehow in the course of conversation, not purposefully, it just popped out something about Edward Weston. And this young woman said, "Oh, who's that?"
Wow.
And I thought, you've graduated with a Master's of Fine Arts in photography, and you don't know who Edward Weston is?
That's amazing.
And it really got me thinking about how we're losing the connection to photography's past.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, and as partly inspiration, I'm in the process, I'm about halfway through writing another book. This one is titled "Those Who Inspire Me and Why." And I've listed, there's about 80 photographers that I've identified who have been very inspirational in my career for odd sort of reasons. Sometimes it's because their work is fabulous, sometimes because their work ethic is fabulous, sometimes because their thought process is fabulous, etc. And I'm writing short little essays about each of these photographers, and I've divided the work into what I call the explorers, the visionaries. I don't want to get into too much detail, but the point is, 80 some odd photographers have taught me something that I can use in my work. And that's because I love the history of photography. I live, eat, and breathe the history of photography. And the question about trying to nail down someone, I guess the real question becomes why? Why do you appreciate? I'll give you one example because you've asked. One of my favorites, who's in the book, is Joseph Sudek.
Yep.
Fabulous photographer, relatively obscure, particularly here in America, more well-known in Europe, obviously, Czechoslovakian. He inspires me because he was a one-armed photographer. He lost his arm in World War I, and he used a view camera. Now, in the first place, I can't even imagine that. How do you use a view camera with one arm? That's inspiring in and of itself.
Yeah.
Then when you look at what he photographed, he couldn't travel far because he lived in Soviet Union and there were travel restrictions, and besides he was relatively poor and he had one arm. So what did he photograph? He photographed his garden. He photographed his kitchen. He photographed his desk. He photographed what he was going to eat for lunch. And they're fabulous photographs. How can you look at that and not be inspired?
Yeah.
That's Joseph Sudek. That's one of, like I say, about 80 that are going to be in the new book.
Tip of the iceberg. That sounds a really interesting book to look out for, actually, Brooks. And I like the style which you've written your books in the past, where it's what I would call a dib and dab type book. You can go in, read a section, put the book down. It doesn't have to be read from cover to cover like a novel, which I like those style of books.
I'm not Dickens.
No.
And when people tell me that I've written a good bathroom read, doesn't insult me in the least.
That's one way of putting it. That's one way of putting it. Brooks, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and I really have appreciated your time. You're supposed to be Friday's your afternoon off as well, so this has been really great for me. A definite highlight for me in my early broadcasting career, for want of description.
Well, thanks, Paul. What you're doing is really terrific. I've gone back and looked at all 28 of your previous interviews, and I found every one of them interesting. And thanks for making them available on YouTube. It's a tremendous contribution to photography, and just keep it up, because you're doing good work.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say that. Yes, it's certainly. Martin Bailey was the guy that I spoke to about it. I said, I'm thinking about doing this, Martin. What do you think? And he said, yeah, go for it. He said, but one thing you got to remember: stick at it, and you'll enjoy it. He said there's going to be some downtime, and there's going to be some uptime, and this was definitely a huge uptime. So thank you so much for joining me. So, folks, I really hope that when if you've watched live now on this particular evening, I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope that you tell your friends about it and Facebook it out and Twitter out, and make sure that you get the word out for people to watch it on YouTube. It'll be available probably in about the next hour or so. But we come to the end of the show, and well, everyone else knows what I'm going to say now, Brooks. You don't. The show Live and Uncut was born from my dream of one camera, one lens, and with one camera and one lens, you don't need a camera bag. So I always say to my guests, thank you for watching the show, everyone, my viewers. If you're going out shooting this weekend, leave your camera bag at home. All the best to you, everyone. Bye for now.